You're listening to Just a Dude podcast with your host, Nathan. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Let's roll. Welcome back to Just a Dude podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, just a regular dude here to chat about life, the grind, and whatever's rattling around in our heads. Today, we're tackling something real, mental health. I've got Brian Sachetta with me. Brian is an author, blogger, and software engineer from Boston who's all about helping folks wrestle their minds into shape. He's got this book series called Get Out of Your Head. The first one's a toolkit for beating anxiety, and he's got more where that came from. He runs a site by the same name, offering coaching and advice, all born from his own battles with anxiety and depression. We're going to dig into his story, his strategies, and maybe figure out how to chill out a little bit. So grab a snack, kick back, and let's get into it. Brian, dude, welcome to the show. Tell us who you are and how you went from coding computers to decoding brains.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so to kick things off, right? I'm Brian Sucheta, owner and author of Get Out of Your Head, which is both a brand and book series that seeks to help folks overcome anxiety and depression. And how did I get into the space? How did I, as you alluded to, how did I go from writing software to writing books? It really came down to two things. So one was I was dealing with my own anxiety and a little bit of depression at the time that I was thinking about writing some content, right? Whether that was a blog post or a book or whatever. And the other piece was I was in a job that just for one reason or another was not that fulfilling for me. So I kind of took those two things together. You know, it was almost this sort of confluence, if you will, the right time in my life where I had made some progress with my own anxiety and I really wanted to, give back and help other people. And I also found myself in this job where I just didn't feel a lot of meaning. I didn't feel a lot of purpose. So I thought to myself, like, what is an avenue that I could go down that might help me find some meaning and some purpose? And, I didn't have my own family. So the options were kind of limited. And at that age, which was, I think, starting around 26 when I started thinking about all this, I was kind of in the mindset of I'm young. I have product experience. I have some life experience, some work experience. Why don't I go down that route? So I started, synthesizing the notes that I had accumulated over the years about my own anxiety and eventually got to the point of saying, there's enough content here where I feel like I could do that thing of being helpful to other people. So it started with a couple blog posts, but eventually grew into my first book, which is Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. I wouldn't say the rest is history because the story's always,
It's still going, right?
It's still going, but I would say 10-ish years later, here we are with a couple books, a lot of podcast appearances, just trying to help as many people as I can.
Yeah, Brian, and I love that because I come from the tech sector myself. Now, I'm not a coder per se, but I'm a Scrum Master, so I'm sure you probably know what that is. You've at least heard of it. But I know what you're like because sometimes we get in these ruts, especially when we're isolated, right? Like I know, a lot of times when I'm working with engineers, we're all isolated different places, and that can really add to your anxiety and your depression as well. I don't know. I know you've been doing this for 10 years, but I can't even imagine how much worse it would have been had you done this during COVID, had these experiences during COVID time, which I'm sure so many people did, and the anxiety that brought in addition to it. But yeah, I just, I wanted to let you know that that's how I kind of connected and hooked up with you because I just saw, some of that similarities and know that if it happens in tech, it can happen in any industry. And, regardless of what we do with our jobs, we shouldn't, we can always find other purpose. So, hopefully we're going to dig into this a little bit more, but, the next thing I want to ask you is, you've been pretty open about your own fights with anxiety and depression, and that's great because you're speaking from experience. But what was that like, and what flipped the switch for you to start really helping others? I know we touched on it a little bit, but, what was it like for you? Like, what was that aha moment where, all right, this is what I need to do?
Yeah, it's funny because when I look back on it, it wasn't this sexy thing. It certainly wasn't. It was more, I didn't have all the answers, or at least I looked back at not having some of the answers and thought to myself, now that I do have some answers, there are obviously people out there who are in the same position I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I want to try to reach those people. I really I was sort of in a place, right, where as I alluded to, I was seeking that meaning, that purpose, that kind of thing. And as men, right, I think it's hard for us to really speak freely, talk about our emotions.
Yep,
Society, we've come a long way in the last
absolutely.
decade, but
We have.
growing up, I grew up in the 90s, right?
Yep. Me too. I'm like late 80s, early 90s was my time. I graduated high school in 2000. So,
Okay, cool.
yeah,
So it was just a very, very different time, right? And what I usually reference is when I went off to college, guys did not ever talk about anxiety, did not ever
never.
talk about depression. So
Never.
I found myself in that place being like, I'm struggling so hard, I don't have the answers, and I'm told that I can't talk about this stuff, right? So if there was a moment, it was when I say it wasn't sexy, right? It was I had endured enough pain to be able to say, screw it. I'm just going to talk about this stuff because I want to, because I think it will help me, because I think it will help other people. So it sort of that pain became that leverage point for me. And I will also say, to speak to the lack of sexiness of it, if you will, I wish that at times, right, I was more open and honest with people in my individual circles, but that's very hard to do. It almost seemed a little bit easier, and it was easier to say, hey, rather than sit every single person down that I'm friends with and tell them exactly what goes on in my mind, I'm just going to write a book, and then I hope that it sparks that conversation, right? People will say, oh, okay, I guess I didn't realize that Brian struggles with that thing, but he obviously has spent a lot of time writing about it, so it's sort of an invitation to say, let's chat now. So, it's certainly not easy. I'm not sitting here putting my hand up and saying I'm the most open, the most
Right.
vulnerable person, but I felt like I had to start somewhere. And I will also say that looking back, that, in the last decade, that has really catalyzed a lot of conversations for me in this space, right? Kind of just getting on that
Yeah.
path, allowing people to see the work that I've done, and then either ask me about my own stuff or reach out to me and say, hey, I know that you specialize in XYZ. I'm struggling with anxiety. A friend is struggling with depression. Can you talk to me about it?
Yeah. And that's awesome because when we have someone that we could talk to, and that's one of the things too that you hit on it right there, my age group and your age group, I think we were taught as we were growing up that, hey, if you're a guy, you don't show emotion, you don't cry, right? You don't talk about these things. Just suck it up, rub some dirt on it and move on, right? That's what they tell us. But you're absolutely right. And in order to make sure that our mental health is in a good space, we do have to talk about it. Even if it is, like you said, writing it down, that's a huge help, right? Or talking to someone else about it. And it doesn't have to be a professional. It could be a friend. It could be a loved one, a spouse, whatever it may be. Whoever's in your life, you could talk to them about it. But you're absolutely right to get out of that stigma to say, hey, we're not supposed to talk about it, to say, no, I'm going to talk about it. I think that was a huge step and a pretty bold move on your behalf, considering how we grew up.
I appreciate it. And there was a little boldness, but there was also some ignorance or stupidity, right? Of just, I'm just going to go for it and let's see what happens.
You know what? And that's the one thing too is like, what do you have to lose? Really nothing, right? I mean, people could look at you in a different way, but in the reality of it, if you start talking about it, you probably have more to gain than you do to lose.
You definitely do. And I'm kind of going to open a can of worms right now, right? But I will sometimes say to folks, I know it's not always this black and white. I know it's not always this simple, and it's certainly not this easy. But if you are struggling so hard with your mental health that you are on the verge of self-harm, you need to ask yourself, right? Would I rather be dead or would I rather talk to somebody? And I know it's so daunting to talk to somebody, but really step back and think about that for a minute. We can't always see it when we're in that headspace, but when we get that clarity, it's like, okay, I'll have one conversation with a therapist, a good friend, a loved one. That is manageable. I'm not saying it's easy, but we can do it,
Yeah, and it's like people in recovery say, right, one step at a time. You just have to make that initial step. And I love the fact that you came out so raw and literally said that, listen, if you're having thoughts in your head about harming yourself or not being here, right, then, think, what's the alternative? Oh, I could talk to somebody about this and maybe get better, right? Or maybe improve my life a little bit. So to me, that seems like a no-brainer, but, it's easier said than done, like you said, right? But yeah, I love that you brought that up because you're right. Think to yourself, if you want to harm yourself, obviously there's places out there that can help you and give you, crisis hotlines and things like that. But think to yourself, even if you start going down that path. I love it, Brian. Just, would you not rather not be here or just talk to somebody about it? So that's just great advice right off the bat. And Brian, with this, you're a software guy, right? You came with a nice technical background, but how did that play into you figuring out this mental health side?
There was a lot of different pieces there. I think one is actually the one that you alluded to earlier, right? Of saying you work in tech, and regardless of if it's tech or just working behind a computer all day, right? That isolation piece and understanding that if we get into some sort of field that involves critical thinking, we get rewarded for that critical thinking on the job. And then sometimes, often a lot of times, we go home and we bring those critical thinking skills to our mental health. And I'm not saying that you can't think through some of your problems, but a lot of these problems are emotional problems, and you can't really reason with emotions. They are emotional and sometimes irrational, right? And so
Exactly.
what you often need to do is sort of the opposite of bring the rationality into the game. You need to almost step back, get out of your head, reconnect with your body, and find a way past those feelings or allow those feelings to either move through you or find a way to leverage those feelings into positive actions, right? The example that I sometimes give is, and it's not quite mental health, but you have the lawyer who is at home, is at court every day, putting witnesses on the stand, right? And then he goes home and he puts his wife on the proverbial stand.
Yep.
And we need to kind of, create that separation of church and state, if you will, and say, hey, when I'm on the job, I'm a software developer, I'm a scrum master, I'm an accountant. I bring my critical thinking skills to work. When I go home, when I'm dealing with my anxiety, when I'm dealing with depression, I have to know that at the root of these issues is an emotion. And trying to reason with an emotion or trying to outthink an emotion doesn't really ever work. The main thing is you got to find a way to, like I said, let that emotion move through you or find a way to leverage it.
Yeah, and it's like not to, diminish what you're saying, but it's like the old saying of you never argue with a drunk, right? Because there's no logical thinking there. And it's the same way with your emotions. Emotions, now they can be logical, right? At sometimes, right? Fear is an emotion. Someone's pointing a gun at you and you're fearful. That's logical, right? Totally understandable. But other things, like you said, are not usually logical. And you really need to not use that logical mindset and really get to the root of the feeling that you're experiencing and find out how to get an outlet for it, right? And is that essentially what we're saying?
Yeah, it really is, man. Yeah, it's funny because when you said the line about the drunk, right, is
Yeah.
obviously so much of what we say could be misinterpreted. It's sort of we are trying our best to simplify things, and when you
Yes.
simplify things, inevitably there are corner cases and all that. But I think it's a wise point. Obviously it's a slightly different avenue or arena to talk
Yes.
about a drunk person than anxiety, but I think there's a through line there, which is to say that there are problems that really don't deal with the rational, right? And when we put too much focus on them and say to ourselves, hey, drunk person, I'm trying to reason with you, right? We drive ourselves crazy. And so it's almost that
Absolutely.
dropping of the rope to say, I need to identify which of these problems are worth investing more emotion into. And the ones that are not, I have to let those go to some degree.
Yeah, and that's amazing too, because another thing that you said that I want to touch on, because I have problems with this, is that separating your work life from your home life, and it is that, especially if you work from home, makes it even more difficult, right? The only thing I could do is I do have a dedicated office for my workspace, so I can leave it. But the fact of the matter is if I get an idea in my mind, I usually pop back into the office several times a night and start working again, but you're right. We need to set healthy boundaries between work and home life and really separate the two, and I think that could help with not only our emotions, but just our mental health in general, really shutting down that work side and just enjoying the life side then.
For sure. And we have to state the obvious, which is that it's very hard these days. I remember, which is almost crazy to think about, one of my first jobs after college, there was no Slack. There was no Slack mobile app.
Right.
Like some of the companies I worked for, in order to get company email on your own phone, you had to do like a managed device kind of thing. And so
Yep.
most employees were like, I'm not putting that software on my personal phone. If you want to give me a company phone, that's fine. But that resulted in most people not having company email at home. to think about the fact that there used to actually be a separation of work and home, it almost blows my mind. And so when we
Yeah,
talk about this, right, to say like, oh, we got to get that separation, I just want to make sure that folks don't feel guilty, right? Because this is not a you problem. This is not a me problem or anything like that. Think about the world. We are trained to be on all the time. We carry these devices in our pockets with hundreds of mobile apps on them, a lot of them productivity apps, a lot of them work-related apps. So when we say, hey, we have trouble turning it off, I mean, the real issue is that like we are not going to turn our phones off. And yet the
right.
phones are where the Slacks and the pings and the DMs and
Exactly.
the
You're absolutely
emails
right.
are coming from. So it's very hard. I don't think anybody should beat themselves up over this. And also, right, thinking about you mentioned COVID a little while ago.
Hmm.
That was sort of the line in the sand to say we went from a maybe you could have separation of work and home life to it is now just all one big gray ugly mess.
It is. Yep. Yeah. And then you have other features too. Like, think of this as, think about people that have been working remotely since COVID. And now a lot of their employers are forcing them back to the office, right? So now that's getting more undue stress on these folks because they now have a commute that they have to worry about. They now have to, prepare and add extra hours of preparation to their day just to go into the office to do the same thing that they were doing at home. So that adds anxiety and things as well. And then, like you said, you're still connected when you come back home if you are in an office environment. And so you never really disconnect. And I think a good message for maybe the employers out there too is to realize, maybe encourage your people, if you don't really need to have these things on your phone, maybe you shouldn't, right? If you're not traveling or you're not, a VP or you're not on 24/7 call, something like that, you really don't need to have it on your phone, right? Encourage work hours.
Yeah, it's a great point. And some of the messaging apps have sort of that like snooze notification feature, right? Where somebody will say, I work from 9 to 5 or I work from 9 to 7. And then after those hours, there's like a little icon basically indicating, hey, if you were to Slack this person, it will get delivered silently. Or if you really want to notify them, you can push through and send that notification. But there's that extra layer of friction, which makes it so that, like the challenging part, right, is nobody is I'd say 99.9% of people are not doing it out of malice or anything like that.
No,
We're all in this system, right? Of I forgot that, John at the office, I forgot to ask him that question. It's 8:30. Let me pull out my phone and ask him before I forget again, right? And then just based off of how we're wired, right? We are animals. We're really advanced
exactly.
monkeys, right? And so our minds don't say, "Oh, I'll get back to that person tomorrow or the next day." They kind of say, oh, they treat it as if you're talking to that person in front of you, And so you wouldn't
Yep,
ignore
exactly.
somebody that's in front of you right now. So you say, oh, or at least the gut reaction is to pull out your phone and respond to that person. So it takes that extra level of discipline to say, I need to pause. I need to maybe not just give in to the impulse and pull out the phone. But this is all very challenging stuff. And the most challenging thing about it is it's such a part of our everyday lives that we don't even really see it all the time. It's just baked in and becomes second nature.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think that was such a great segment to talk about the work-life balance because it's been such a pivotal point nowadays with technology. We have the flexibility to really allow people to work whenever they want. But then again, we run into that issue of, where do you draw the line? Right. And so it's great because that can bring a lot of anxiety. But, the one thing that I wanted to talk about, because I think we're going down this role, is that your book's really a toolkit, right? Your first book. And, but what's one trick that I don't want to say trick, but a piece of advice you would give for someone like in this situation we just talked about? How do you handle those types of things?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that we could talk about. One thing that I come back to frequently is this idea, right? And it dovetails nicely with what we're discussing right now, which is anxiety is a product of the fight or flight nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, right? So the same system that we will say was designed hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years ago to get you out of threatening situations, to get you away from that snarling tiger. That system is still running in your brain. And your brain is looking at things in its environment and reacting in the same fashion, possibly, even when those things are not actual tigers, right? So when you're in
Right.
that traffic jam, when you get 10 Slacks from that person that you don't want to talk to, when you get more emails from your boss, that mechanism in your brain could potentially turn on and say, this is a dangerous or threatening situation. We need to get out of it somehow. The problem is that there's no running from an email, right? There's
No.
sure you can put your phone down and that sort of thing, but there's no actual there's no equivalent of running away from the tiger.
It's still going to be there at the end, right?
Exactly. So the system the system in the brain, the sympathetic nervous system is continuing to rev up and run all the same playbook that it used to. And yet the real challenge is like, we don't have the same methods available to us as in run away from that traffic jam, a fight with that email that we used to with the tigers, right? That we found in our environment. So what ends up happening is we find ourselves in this stressful world, in this stressful environment where our sympathetic nervous systems are getting revved up all the time. And when that system is getting revved up too much, we then, the anxiety comes on a little bit more easily, right? So you're stressed out and somebody crosses your path, and because you're stressed out and your sympathetic nervous system is revved up, you sort of jump, right? You have that startle response. So why I'm giving this preamble is basically to say that, okay, so we live in this world where we can't run away from the emails and the traffic jams and whatnot. But if we go back and we think about the way that system was designed, or what it was designed to help us do, so what happens under the surface, right, is when you come across something that's menacing or threatening, cortisol, the stress hormone, and adrenaline secrete into your bloodstream, right? And those are basically chemical messengers that say, run for your life and find safety. So when we're in that traffic jam, we're getting that same cortisol and adrenaline release. But that challenge is we can't run away from the traffic. At the same time, even though that's challenging, we can still run or move our bodies in general, right? And so a lot of anxiety management comes down to stress management, and then also finding a way to regulate your nervous system. So even though you can't run away from those emails, you can still do the thing that your body is trying to nudge you to do, right? So if it was trying to say, there's a tiger in front of you, run for your life. And if you think about that, right, in terms of those chemicals, the adrenaline and the cortisol is trying to push you to move your body and find that safety. The funny thing about this, I guess we would call it an evolutionary process, is even though we're way off from, the environmental conditions in which this mechanism arose, and it doesn't really make sense that, moving our bodies in response to an email could be helpful, it's still that same mechanism, and it sort of responds to the same stimuli, if you will. So another way of saying that is, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, when you get that email, now obviously you can't go for a walk when you're in traffic, but once you get out of the traffic jam and you park your car in the parking lot, get out of your car, get out of your house, go for a walk, maybe go for a quick jog, use those same chemical messengers that are in your bloodstream, the cortisol and the adrenaline, as a means of, or an impetus for moving your body. And once you move your body, you can look at it as basically appeasing your nervous system and saying, hey, brain, we found that threat. You secreted those chemical messengers. I am now doing what you wanted me to do with those chemical messengers. When we do all of that, we eventually send a message back to the amygdala, the fear center of the brain, that says, okay, you have appeased me. We are away from this threat. We have moved our bodies, and therefore I'm going to turn off the alarm. So I know it's a bit long-winded way of saying things.
No, but that's great. And even for the listeners, because a lot of us may not have known, all of that background on why this is happening and the outlet for it, and that's such an easy outlet to do, right? Take a walk around the house, park your car when you get done, go around the parking lot a couple times before you go into wherever you're going, and yeah, it's such a great outlet because it then says, hey, I see that you've done this and I've now given you the outlet for it. And now we can get back to normal. Hopefully.
We hope, yeah. And I guess the nice thing about it is that it's simplistic, right? Whenever you're getting that stress response and you're feeling stressed out, you don't necessarily need to walk through some complex set of tactics, right? You can just say to yourself, I feel that emotion coming on. I need to just get up and go for a quick walk. I need to get up and I need to move my body. And then you check in with yourself after you've done that and you say, how am I feeling? Most likely, you're going to feel a little bit better. The funny thing, or sort of the scary, sad thing, is if you think about most of our anxiety, right, is what are we doing when we're running the thought loops in our minds? Most of the time, we are in bed, we are on the couch, we are sitting at our desks, and we
We're
are just
idle, right?
yeah, we're idle and the mind is whirring. So get up, use some of that energy that's coursing through you as that impetus to go for the walk, and then allow, the movement of the body to sort of pacify the amygdala and the stress response system.
Yeah, and it's amazing that, just myself, hearing this now, and I've probably heard it before, but Brian, hearing it now in this conversation we're having, I'm like, that's such an easy response and something so simple to do. Why haven't I been doing that before? You should think that would be common sense, but I guess sometimes, a lot of us don't do research on how the mind works and how the body responds. And, so thankfully I'm pretty sure you did, because it sounded like you had good information there. But yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's such an easy thing to do to help relieve some of that anxiety.
For sure. And I will say, right, I kind of put my hand up and say, I am, I'm many years into this journey, into this battle, that kind of thing. But I still also find simple strategies on the regular where I'm like, hey, that's pretty simple. And yet, like, how did I not think of that? So
right.
That's just like, it's one of those things where we almost don't want to admit that a simple thing works. But then when you find that it does, you're like, you know what? I'll kind of put my ego aside. If it helps me feel better, I'm willing to buy into that.
Yeah. Did you ever have that happen when you were, doing programming or, software development, and sit there and go, no, this can't be it. It's got to be more complicated to this. And you realize it's just one line of code that makes all the difference.
Definitely. And I mean, I think in a lot of ways, right, that is the example of sort of the seasoned veteran, if you will. I'm not saying that I'm one, but we've come across stories like that before where there's somebody who's, higher up in a company or older or whatever, has more experience, and the new young gun comes in and does something that the older person hadn't thought of, right? They're like, with one line of code, they come up with the solution. And the older person, hey, maybe it's me. I'm like, there's no way that
Right.
can work, and it's incredulousness on our part, because we're like, how did we not think of that on some level?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, because sometimes simplicity is the best, in everything that we do. The more simple, what's the old adage? Keep it simple, stupid, right? KISS. Just keep it simple. It doesn't have to be elaborate, anything. And it doesn't have to be coding or anything like that, but just think, what's the simplest way I can resolve this problem? It doesn't have to be elaborate, doesn't have to be overthought, and if you're overthinking something and not coming up with it, step away from it for a minute, right? Maybe go for a walk like you suggested if it's causing anxiety. But that's excellent. That's excellent advice, because I know a lot of us have anxiety today. But another thing that you touch on that I think sometimes goes hand in hand with it, especially if we have a lot of anxiety, is depression. And that's in your sights too. But what's something you'd say, to somebody who's just stuck in that dark hole?
Yeah. So let me start by answering the actual question. And then I do think it would be helpful to tie the anxiety and the depression together, because you alluded to it, and I just want to like put a bow on that sort of thing. So when it comes to the depression, what I talk about a lot, right, is there's this framework in the psychology or the medical space called the biopsychosocial model. It is a framework for evaluating and possibly treating diseases. And so when it comes to depression, we can use this same model to evaluate what's going on in our lives. So we've got that word biopsychosocial, which is a portmanteau of three different words: biological, psychological, and social. So it kind of forms three different buckets, if you will, right? And so the theory goes that if you apply this model to depression, you would say that there are biological forces that shape or influence depression. There are also psychological forces and social forces. So the biological ones may be being, what do you eat? How, do you exercise? What are your genetics like? Does depression potentially run in your family? Psychological being, your thoughts, your beliefs. How do you talk to yourself on a daily basis? And then social being kind of everything else. Where do you live? What kind of relationships do you have? What's your job like? I think, even though it's a little simplistic, I think it's a great framework for evaluating depression, because most of us can do this. Once we hear about it, we can kind of catalog our own lives, right? And we can say to ourselves, which of these buckets is least full, right? I think for those suffering from depression, now it's not always going to be the case that we can immediately say it's this bucket or it's that bucket. But what I would say is, if you if you can't say that it's any one of these buckets, then I think the fallback is, all right, if, my social life is great and my school life or my work life is great and my family life is great and I'm eating the right foods and I'm working out and all that, but I'm still not feeling good, then maybe, right? Maybe it's kind of that category that people talk about of a chemical imbalance. And then maybe you go and talk to your doctor and you say, hey, it seems like everything's great in my life and yet I still don't feel right. That's when you have that conversation and maybe the doctor says, let's try a medication, right? Maybe that is the way that we quote unquote remedy this thing, right? We address the biological bucket, if you will, and then maybe that helps. It sort of becomes this, a little bit of a synergy, right? Where it's like you address the biological bucket or any of the other ones, and then that biological bucket starts to affect in a positive fashion the psychological bucket and the social bucket. And so I just think it's a great way of cataloging things and allowing people to more readily put their finger on what it is that they are dealing with, right? Depression can be so all-encompassing and challenging that a lot of folks are like, I'm drowning. I don't know even where to begin. But if you start with this simple framework, I think it's more approachable, right? And then I'm not saying it's the easiest thing in the world, but I do think it's simpler to be like, okay, if I look at my social bucket and I'm honest with myself, I don't have a lot of friends right now, or I just got into a horrible argument with, my girlfriend. Going down that list and being honest with yourself and identifying those key areas, then turning around and saying to yourself, how can I rebuild those areas of my life? And once I do, how will things look? Is my mood going to improve? So what I do want to say, just to cap this off, is to say that unfortunately, depression is by definition a longer lasting and sort of the timeline itself is a little bit larger, right? They will often say if you're dealing with major depressive disorder, you have to exhibit a bunch of different symptoms for at least 2 weeks, right? So if you're sad for a day or if you're really down for a day, that might not, that's probably not depression. The other side of that coin
is it's temporary, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other side of that coin is to say that if it took you at least 2 weeks to get there, it very well could take you a little while to get out of there. Whereas with anxiety, the sympathetic nervous system revs up and we feel some of that anxiousness. And then once we get it to power down, often we get an alleviation of that anxiety. That's kind of not quite the case with depression. So all of this is to say, catalog your life, figure out if you can where things are kind of lacking, and then also give yourself some credit. Don't be too hard on yourself. Understand that rebuilding your life and getting through depression can be something of a longer battle. That's not to say, give in to despair that you're never going to get out of this thing, but understand that it's going to take a little bit of time and that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. And I would even say, if you have some type of things that maybe happened in your lifetime a long time ago that you've suppressed for years, if you've suppressed that for years, it's going to probably take a few years to get rid of that, right? Because you're going to have to talk it out and get rid of those things. So yeah, it's two different coins, but very similar, right? Because they both affect us the way we feel physically, mentally, and can challenge our days. But with depression, are there certain things that you want people or advise people to look at in order to help build momentum and combat those feelings of helplessness?
Yeah, for sure. So two things. One is related to what you just said, right? So let's just put a name on it. What is depression, right? In layman's terms, depression is a pervasive state of hopelessness and helplessness. So the goal then is to find the opposite of those things, which would be agency and also hope, I guess, right? So you almost need to slowly stack the deck back in your favor. So you said, what are some advice that you'd give to people, right? One of the pieces of advice that I would give is, because it's a slower moving condition and it is challenging, right? Think of it, break it down as small as you can and try to find the smallest wins that you can and stack those on top of one another. We said earlier in the conversation that anxiety and depression at the root, right? These are emotional issues. And so when it comes to depression, right, we need to change that emotion of despair. We need to get out of that emotion of hopelessness, out of that emotion of helplessness. And that could take a little while, right? Especially depending on, how we got there. And as you alluded to, Nate, hey, maybe somebody has gone through something horrific in their life and it's going to take them a while to unpack that. Sure, that is absolutely a possibility. At the same time, one of the most important things is to build those wins, to build that agency, to say, hey, even if it's the simplest thing in the world, yesterday I couldn't get out of bed, today I got out of bed. That's a win. The next day, okay, I got out of bed again and I went for a 2-minute walk. You're just trying to stack little win on top of little win, right? And eventually get it such that you're almost building this flywheel, if you will, like an emotional flywheel. So you've got like with each little win that you get, you're ticking one further rung on the flywheel. It's moving a little bit more, with the goal being that in time, you stack up enough of those wins, you get enough momentum going that flywheel starts moving faster and eventually moves all on its own, right? And the concrete equivalent of that is that your mood is humming again. You are feeling better. You are feeling that sense of agency. You're feeling that sense of hope. And I was on a podcast recently and somebody asked me, like, how do you build that sense of agency? One of the funny things is if you talk to people who have been through depression, it comes from some sort of like strange or source that you wouldn't necessarily jump to, wouldn't always think of, right? So for some people, it'll be like, hey, they used to love painting and they got back into painting. And as soon as they completed a painting and they realized that they are actually a half decent painter and they can do things, right? They can create beautiful art. That sparks something in their mind to say like, I'm not worthless. I can produce things in the world. I can get that flywheel going. And then it's that one win after another, right? To say, I'm doing something else. I'm building up that momentum. It could even be as simple as, hey, you got a favorite video game. You pull that video game out. You beat one of the levels of the video game. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, I did something, right? So it's really just getting that momentum going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I love that you said focusing on small and achievable actions, right? And I think that's the key. Make them small. Like you're not going to say, hey, can't get out of bed today, so tomorrow I'm going to run a marathon, right? That is not small and probably not achievable if you're stuck in bed. So like you said, focusing on small but yet achievable actions, like you said, if I'm stuck in bed today, what can I do tomorrow to make it just a little bit better? Just get out of bed. Even if it's going from your bedroom onto the couch, right? It's achievable, and it was small. You were able to do it, and like you said, just keep building off of those things. And I think that is some excellent advice. And we come back to the simplicity, right?
Yeah, we absolutely do. I guess, like I said, just to tie a bow on all of this, right? Linking the anxiety with the depression and also the stress piece that we talked about earlier in the show, which is, so there is this thing that was developed, a framework or a protocol that was developed at, I want to say the University of West Virginia. I might be wrong on that, but there's this protocol called the UCMS protocol. And it is essentially, well, let me tell you what it stands for. It is the Unpredictable Chronic Mild Stress Protocol. It is a protocol that scientists can apply or, put mice through that shows that when they are stressed in an unpredictable, chronic, and mild fashion over a long period of time, most of those mice eventually fall into depression. So the idea or the thought is that if you experience, or if a mice experiences enough stress and enough anxiety, right, at first that mouse is going to rev up its sympathetic nervous system and seek a way away from the stress and the danger. But given enough of that stress over a long enough period of time, eventually that mouse is going to fall into that sense of despair and hopelessness and say, I'm just throwing my hands up and I'm going to lay down and take it because I've tried everything that I could try and I still can't find a way out of this stress. So The important takeaway for folks is, we talked about that work-life balance, the fact that we are just continually in an environment of stress. We want to be really careful to keep that separation of work and home life because, as the UCMS protocol warns us, if we don't bring some mindfulness to the stress that we're experiencing on a regular basis, it is a possibility that given enough of that stress from a lot of different places over a long period of time, we may eventually come to the same conclusion that the mice did and say, there's too much stress. I don't know where it's coming from. I can't evade it. What's the point of even trying? And I don't want folks to fall into that trap, right? So the
Yeah, and
anxiety
I can admit, Brian,
lead to
I've been
depression.
there before myself, and it's so weird because you're right, and just thinking about how you get stuck in that, and then the question for me would be, how do you practice that mindfulness, or what type of mindfulness can we use to try to find out what those stressors are?
It's really like the best way for me to answer it is to say that the mindfulness is really a muscle and you have to develop that muscle. I'm not trying to glorify it or anything like that. But if you think about it, right, there's some quote that, and I'm forgetting who said it, but it's essentially in the gap between the stimulus and your response lies all of your power. I want to say it was Viktor Frankl, but I could definitely be wrong on that. So the idea, right, is when that stress comes on, that being the stimulus, if we immediately react with a stressful response, with an anxiety response, we ask ourselves all sorts of scary questions and whatnot, we are inevitably going to feed the stress that is probably already coursing through our bodies as a result of the stimulus. When we instead say, I'm not going to jump to conclusions right now. I'm not going to, run these loops in my mind. I'm going to just take a step back, take a breather, and evaluate the situation. That's where we gain some power. And the challenge is that our brains are designed to be incredibly reactionary, right? If you didn't react fast enough to that tiger out in the wild, guess what? You were dead. At the same time, it's a very different world today than it was 500,000 years ago. And so we really do have to build up that muscle. It's one step after another to say, hey, I got another Slack, I got another email, rather than stressing myself out and freaking myself out that I got yet another message that I don't want to have to deal with right now. Take those 10 seconds, make that a habit, right? Step back, reevaluate, maybe just put it down for a minute. The more that you do that, the more you will build up that power and you will realize that those stimuli do not have as much power over you.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, just for folks that may not know, how to handle those types of situations or even what to be mindful about, that's great advice for all of us. And it goes with anything in life, really. You have to be mindful of those things that do stress you out and then try to remove those stressors from your life if you can. Now, I think and I know as well that we can't always remove all the stressors, right? We try to as much as we can, but we can't. But, that can lead to the anxiety. But then we have another tip that if we do get that anxiety, we know how to expel it.
Yeah, that's for sure. And one thing, just to be totally real, right, is the most challenging thing about the mindfulness in this day and age is, as we all know, there are so many distractions that we can't even tell what a distraction is anymore.
You're absolutely right. Yep. Absolutely right.
And there are days where I'm like, hey, I got this mindfulness thing figured out. And then subconsciously, I open Instagram. There's a video there that, catches my attention. And the next thing I know, it's 2 minutes later. And I'm like, how the heck did I get here? So I just want to tell folks, I'm right there with you. It is a challenging thing. It's really a muscle that we need to continually develop.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about Brian's book and his website is that he's speaking from experience. He's not like speaking down to you. He's gone through all of this stuff. So, just for our listeners, this is just so you know that, Brian is actually teaching us from his own experiences. So he's letting us learn from what happened in his life so that we can maybe avoid it in our own, which I think is great, Brian. And I just wanted to make sure we threw that out there so everybody knew. But, one of the things that I do want to talk about now, because we've hit, anxiety, depression, but I want to talk about your overall, get out of your head, the book series that you have and your website. Can you give the listeners just a little bit of information about what your books are about, how those may help them, as well as your website and what you offer there?
For sure. Yeah. In some ways, right, the books are kind of just an extension of the conversation that we've been having. So the first book, as I mentioned earlier, is Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. It's a combination of research that I stumbled upon or I sought out, during my own struggles, personal stories of struggles with anxiety. And, it's not triumph moments. It's more, hey, white knuckling it or doing the hard work of trudging through these difficulties, eventually getting to the other side or to a better frame of mind and tying all that up in a sort of maybe a fun or informative way and passing that on to the listener to say, as you just did, Nathan, hey, I went through a lot of this stuff for many years. My goal is to make it such that somebody who picks up my books does not struggle as long as I struggled. There's,
Yes.
it is not necessary that you do that. And this is not the suffering Olympics. You're not going to get a gold medal for, for suffering a longer period of time than anybody else. So the first book really is just kind of like, the tactical advice of, okay, you are dealing with anxiety in this moment. What can you do to alleviate some of that anxiety? And then also from a higher level, right? We talked about mindfulness on this show and all of those things. How do you develop life habits and rituals that make it such that you fall into anxiety less often? Another way of saying that is we also talked about the sympathetic nervous system and its relationship to anxiety. How do you make it such that your stress levels are lower, your sympathetic nervous system is revved up less often, and therefore you don't experience as much of that anxiety that is associated with the high stress state? So that's the first book.
Almost retraining it, right? Retraining yourself in that fight or flight response to say, hey, not everything has to be a fight or flight.
Absolutely, yeah. So the second book is Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. It chronicles a depressive episode that I went through in 2018 and 2019. And in a lot of ways, right, I look back on that book and I will often say when I talk about that book is, I was going through this dark time in my life. To be honest, I really struggled to exist in that time period. I didn't know if I wanted to go on. I didn't know if I wanted to, to live. Eventually, I got to the point of saying, hey, I wrote a book about anxiety where I, went through these struggles, found a way to get through them, and then packaged all that up into a product that I felt was helpful for readers and listeners around the world, right? I had already developed something of a platform for, this mental health brand. And so I said, hey, what if nothing else, you take it upon yourself to say, yes, I want to get healthy for myself, but I also want to get healthy so that way when I do, I can integrate all the things, or I can take all the things that I learned along the way. I can once again package those things up into a book and share that with more readers and more listeners, right? I kind of tried to make it in those dark moments, tried to make it less about myself and more about other people. When you talk to enough people who are happy and thriving, you eventually get to the point of realizing that the more that you focus on yourself, the more miserable you are likely to be. And those who are happiest are likely, those who kind of come to life with a service mindset. And so I'm not saying, I'm out there at every single soup kitchen or whatever, but
right.
The mental health brand is my way of trying to serve others and help others, because the mental health stuff has been my fight, has been my battle in my life. And that's how I feel I can contribute in a special way to society.
And Brian, I want to piggyback off that because that's kind of what I brought this podcast for, right? Is I wanted to elevate what I call quote unquote normal voices, right? Normal everyday people that, go to work every day just like us, have families, whatever it may be. There's nothing really special about us, so to speak. We're not millionaires. We haven't invented, the next big, meta or whatever, but we still can do extraordinary things with, the time that we have, and we can serve others. So that's what I like to do, is have people like yourself come on to show others, hey, one, you're not alone. Two, all of us can do these things, right? It's not just, Brian, it's not just Nate. All of us can do these things that you're talking about. You can help yourself, you can help others, and, you can really do something extraordinary without being stressed out about it. And so that's where I just wanted to say, I really relate to you on that, because I think the platforms that we have are here for service.
Yeah, I love that message. And I think, kind of a message to the listener would be, figure out where those channels of influence are for you, right? It doesn't, as Nathan said, right, it doesn't need to be necessarily that you go and found the next $1 billion or $1 trillion company. Sure, if you want to, that's amazing. Go for it.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, you're looking for those places where you can put your service into, and you can cultivate, senses of joy and gratitude and peace and fulfillment and all of that. That could come from a company. It could also come from a relationship or, something you do in your community. And
yeah, the soup kitchen, like you said, right?
Exactly. And neither one of us is here to judge what that thing is. Each person on their own level has to make an evaluation as to how do those different things make that person feel, right? And if you're getting all of those great feelings out of the service, quote unquote, that you are doing, then you've hit the goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. With your second book, how many is it just the 2 books or you have more?
For now, it's just the 2.
Okay. And then what about your website? What can folks seem to get out of that?
Yeah, the website is kind of a hub, right? So I've got resources for the books there. You can link out to the different storefronts. Then my blog is there as well. So there's a bunch of different,
Nice.
blog posts. It's sort of like, hey, if I want to put out a piece of content and I can't, wait to get a next
Wait for
book
a book.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if it just doesn't fit into the theme of a specific book, then I publish it on the blog. There's also, if you go there and you are interested there, I do have some merchandise that folks can get if they are interested in the Get Out of Your Head brand. And then also I do run a coaching practice through the website. So there's either a form or an email that you can access through the website if you're interested in learning more about coaching. And the coaching is essentially, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist, so I'm not licensed to treat, but the coaching is sort of like, hey, let's figure out where you're at today. Let's figure out where you'd like to be in terms of what goals are you trying to hit. And then if you've listened to some of the content or if you've read some of my books, we can take some of the ideas that are embedded in those things and apply them, to the individual coaching client.
Nice. That's awesome. So you're really a one-stop shop, right? You've got the books so people can read on their own. You've got your blog so that, the other things that maybe won't make it into a book are there and people can experience. But not only that, you'll also help people to try to apply some of these lessons you've learned to their own lives and see if it works.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And I will say folks have reached out, and said, hey, this certain thing has helped me or that certain thing has helped me. That is the most rewarding part of this journey. And so if folks are listening and either they have a question or they want to tell their story or something has already, they've already read one of the blog posts or whatever, and it has helped them, I would invite folks to reach out because I really love that sort of thing.
Yeah, and the feedback helps us too, right? Know what's helpful to others. So absolutely, yeah, reach out to Brian, and even for me, let me know if there's something that I've had on the show that's helped you and things that you want to see. But yeah, Brian, I want to switch things up a little bit, just lighten up the air a little bit, let our listeners get to know you. I have a little section that I like to call Dude Q&A, just some simple questions to get to learn about you a little bit. But first one off is for you: coffee or energy drinks? What keeps you going?
Definitely not energy drinks.
Me either.
With the anxiety, I feel like I have to be a little careful on the caffeine intake because it makes me pretty jittery and can make my mind go to places I don't want it to go. So I tend to be more on the tea side. Green tea, if any caffeine. I do love the taste of coffee, but if it's anything over like a cup, I'm going to the moon and I don't know if I want to be there.
I gotcha. Favorite chill out song?
Wow, favorite chill out song. I love, and rest in peace, but I love Avicii or loved Avicii, and he's got the anthems, the party anthems, but he's also got some good chill songs. So I don't know which one I would pick, but something off of his album Stories. I think I probably want to say like 10 More Days, just to give you something concrete. It's chill, but it's got that nice EDM vibe with the synths and all that.
I like it. Now, for you, if you want to share it, you don't have to, but what in your experience did you find is your worst anxiety trigger that you've ever had?
I'm really trying to think this one through. And I'm okay with being honest about it. I'm just trying to figure out what the answer is. What I come back to a lot, and if you read my first book, like a lot of that book is centered around dating anxiety. I've made some progress, but like as a teenager, as a young adult, like really struggled on that front. And what would really get me was the thought or the idea of, there's a girl that I'm pursuing or I'm going on a date with, and the date is off in the future. So it's not tomorrow, it's a week from now. Those week-long periods would kill me.
Oh my gosh, yes, I'm with you.
Okay, yeah.
That you waiting for something, especially if you have that anticipation, you're really looking forward to it. Boy, that could cause some anxiety, can't it?
Yeah, and the thing, right, is it's funny because, some people have read my book, and it's weird where, like, with mental health and anxiety disorders, right? If you don't deal with anxiety in this capacity, it's almost hard to understand it at the same level. I don't mean that in an arrogant kind of way. It's just, we just don't see it the same way. So when I was 18, I had a couple panic attacks on 2 dates with separate women. And so that really wired my nervous system to say, on some level, dating or going on a date or relationships equal pain and panic and failure and heartbreak, right? So that narrative really stuck with me throughout a lot of my life. And so I'd have that date that was really important to me a week out in the calendar or, in the future. And my mind would just go places that I wish I didn't go. But you live and you learn.
And with the panic attacks already happening, right? Now you're thinking, oh, is this going to happen again? I really don't want this to happen, right? The anxiety keeps building then based off of your past experience.
Hit the nail on the head. Yep.
If you could delete one emotion, what's it going to be? This is a tough one. I'm sitting here thinking about it myself because I don't know what I would delete.
Yeah, that's a very tough one. I'm going to go real specific. There is a feeling that is associated with anxiety disorders and sometimes depression. It's called derealization. It makes you feel as though it's not, it's not an emotion that everybody has experienced, but it's this emotion, a feeling that comes over you as if what I'm going through right now is not real. Like, none of this is real. Like, I'm not hallucinating it, but like I just don't feel right in my own skin.
Yeah.
That has been something that I've really struggled with, and I've done a lot of work with my therapist on, right? To just be like, hey, when you get into those moments, you don't have to love it. You just have to allow it and be like, hey, I don't resist it. I'm just going to let it be, and eventually it's going to pass. At the same time, I would love to go back in time and delete that feeling and just be like, that feeling cannot happen. I have dealt with reality in the sense that I have struggled with that emotion in the past, but I would love to not experience that feeling ever again.
Yeah, I don't blame you on that. I think I've had that experience myself where you're just like, it's almost like an out-of-body experience. Like, you're like, it's happening to me, but I'm not here, right? This can't be happening to me. Yeah, I gotcha. Now, Brian, you're from Boston, right?
That's correct.
What is the best Boston food?
Jeez.
I told you I'm taking you on a wild ride here.
Is this a food item specific to Boston?
Yeah, well, it doesn't have. Yeah, I guess the best. What does Boston do best in food?
I would probably say seafood.
Yeah, right there, right?
A lot of good fishing here, a lot of good lobsters. Obviously, people go to Maine and get lobsters, but all in the Northeast and on the coast, the seafood is very good. And actually, funny story was, we know that the seafood here is good, and my family went to Italy. This was many years ago now, but my mom was like, hey, we're in Italy near the coast. We should get a bunch of seafood because it's probably going to be really good.
Yeah, right.
And I was
you always think that.
Yeah, I was like, Mom, you're not wrong, but we also live in like one of the seafood capitals of the world. So like, I don't know what we're missing,
Yeah, exactly. What is one book you would recommend that everybody should read besides yours?
This is a really good question. You may have almost stumped me for a moment.
See, I should have sent you these beforehand, right? That way you could have prepared.
That's all right. Let me think of one. What was one that I listened to very recently? Jeez. You may have to trim this down a little bit because there'll be some dead air.
That's all right. I can edit.
Okay.
Take your time.
Cool. You know what? If I have a moment, I have a list.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Like I said, I can edit this out, so don't even worry about that. I'll make it look like you answered in a second.
That's amazing. All right. I'm going to go here and find best book. Okay. I'm going to answer it as if I thought of it on the spot. Okay. Yeah, best book. There was a book that I read 5 or 6 years ago. It's in the mental health space. It's called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. It sold very well. It's pretty popular, so I think folks may have heard of it before, but just a really good read on, she is a therapist herself. So somebody who is well-versed in the space, but also like was not a therapist her whole life. So she brings in different perspectives, and then also, with confidentiality, talks about some of her clients and some of the struggles that they went through. And I think it's just really, she has a ton of great insights in the book, but it's also insightful just to hear those stories of the clients and find yourself in some of those stories and be like, oh, I do that too, or I struggle with that same thing. And then coming to the conclusion that you're not alone and that there are ways to work through these things. So It was entertaining. Yeah. It was informative. I would definitely recommend that one.
That's awesome. And I love those types of things too, where you can relate to it and know that you're not alone, because I think sometimes, especially when we're talking about anxiety, depression, mental health things, we sometimes get in these bubbles where we think, oh my goodness, this is only happening to me. This has never happened to anyone else, even though logically we know that's not true, right? Especially if you've been on the earth for probably more than 20 to 30 years, you know that most people have probably experienced this at one point in their life. But yeah, it's always nice to find a good book or something that you can relate to that shows you're not alone and then gives you some options on how to try to improve yourself.
For sure.
Yeah. And so last question I have for you, hopefully these haven't been too bad, but what's the weirdest thing you've ever done to calm down?
You know what I will say, because so I was at my girlfriend's house the other night and we were talking about anxiety, and she's actually, reading the first book. I just figured it would be kind of fun to see what her reaction was.
Yeah.
And she said, hey, in the book, you talk about there's a chapter around mantras. So that's one of my tactics is, using a mantra when I'm feeling fearful to calm down. But within that chapter, I talk about how, whether I said it or not, right? I went to a Tony Robbins seminar. He's one of those like personal development gurus, but I don't know. I just kind of love him. And obviously,
yeah, I remember him from Shallow Hal, if you remember that movie.
Oh yeah, that's hilarious. Everybody will have a different take.
Head, sorry.
Yeah. Yep. Everybody will have a different take on him. Totally fine. I just, I found him at a moment in my life where I was at a low point and he really helped me. So that's kind of what I stick to.
Yeah. He's very impactful too. I mean, just listening
really
to
is.
him.
Yeah. He's an impressive dude. And so he, when you go to his events, he says, get in a peak state and quote unquote, make your move. Making your move is doing something physical with your body to get like a surge of energy. So people may clap their hands together. They may, they may jump up and down. For one reason or another, my move, actually, I know why I made this move was I live in Boston, have been here most of my life, Celtics fan, and Kevin Garnett, when we had him on the team, before the games, he would pound his chest and he would like point into the crowd. And I just always thought like, he was just a hilarious dude, so passionate. Like he was the guy you wanted on your team. You didn't want on any,
right.
If he was on anybody else's team, you hated him. And so he would do that. And so I just started doing that at the Tony Robbins seminar. That became my quote unquote move. Eventually, I don't know. I started doing two hands at the same time because there was a time where I was so nervous that I was like, I need more than the one hand, right? So I started doing the two hands at the same time. And so I was at my girlfriend's house the other night and she was reading the chapter about mantras where I talk about Tony Robbins. And then I say that my move is, pounding my chest with both of my hands to help, change my energy and alleviate some of the anxiety. And she was like, you don't do that. I've never seen you do that. And I was like, well, I only do that in the privacy of my own home and nobody needs to know about it other than the people that read this book. But if you want to, yep. I will do it right now. And I did it. And she was laughing and it was just funny. So.
That is funny. And you're like, well, obviously you haven't made me anxious enough to do it. No, but that's awesome. Thanks for indulging me on the Dude Q&A. I think it's great. It's just, brings us a little down to earth, get to know you a little bit better. But, one thing, as we're coming up to our time here, Brian, is you've got this whole get out of your head thing rolling. And it sounds like it's just gangbusters and it can really help a lot of people. You got the books, the blog, the coaching. What's the next big play for you?
Oh, good question. I mean, honestly, right? My brand is honesty, and honesty has been a theme of this conversation. I'm really trying to find a way, right, to get a little more gasoline on the fire, if you will. I still do the software development because, let's face it, to sell enough books to pay the bills, you have to sell a lot of books, and I do sell some. but you have
Yeah.
to sell quite a lot, especially when you think of what the margin is, even just what Amazon gives you if somebody finds the book on their own. But then, you're likely spending ad dollars to drive people toward the book page to get
Right.
them to maybe buy it. So you do have to sell quite a lot of books. Where I'm at is, really wanting to be able to spend more time on the brand, put out more content, affect more people, reach more people. And so I guess what I'd love to be able to say, hey, the next thing is book 3. At the moment, I don't quite have the time for that. Not saying it's never going to come, but in this, exact moment, it's a little ways off. Been working on an updated edition of my first book for a while now. Still trying to find enough time, piece together enough time to finish that up. I'm hoping that when I do that, when I re-release that and I do a little bit of a marketing campaign, my hope would be that it reaches more people, it helps more people, it makes some waves, and then allows me, whatever it is, whether it's financial opportunities or just more speaking engagements, that kind of thing, the ability to say, hey, there's a little bit more of a viable path here where I can go off, get away from the software development for a little bit, help more people, reach more people, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm vibing on. But, I say all this and I give so much credit to people who are out there, the actual starving artists. I have no idea how you do it. It is,
yeah, you and me both,
tough.
because I can relate to your statement right there so much, because I love doing this podcast thing. It's kind of a hobby for me, but I enjoy it. I really love getting messages out there to folks. But if I could make money off of this and not have to be a Scrum Master anymore, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Because this is what I love. I love having these conversations. I love sharing these awesome stories with folks to, like I said, to let you know you're not alone, that we can all do things that are exceptional and just keep moving forward. As human beings, we don't have to be stuck in a hole we're at today. We can always be a better version of ourselves. But, that's sweet. I totally relate to that for sure. But where can the folks, find you if they're vibing with this and want to know more?
Yeah, so as we were talking about earlier, my website, that is getoutofyourhead.com, no dashes, no underscores. And then on Instagram, the account is getoutofyourhead. That's all one word, if you will. So website and Instagram for now. May add more channels in the future, but those are the best places as of today.
Yeah, and just remember, the more channels you get, the more anxiety you get.
And the more work you have to do. So.
You do, exactly. But yeah, getoutofyourhead.com. And you got free resources, your book details on there, and your coaching options are available. So yeah, definitely go to getoutofyourhead.com to check out Brian's stuff, support him, maybe support yourself by learning what he went through. But also, Brian, just so you know, and so our listeners know, and most of them probably know because I say this every episode, but you'll have a guest page on justadudepodcast.com. So all the links that you provide me, social media, photo, your link to your website, it's all going to be there as well. So they can go there as well. So getoutofyourhead.com or justadudepodcast.com and look for Brian's picture. And one way or another, that'll get you to him. But Brian, as we're wrapping things up here, is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience before we go?
I always close with a similar message, and it's basically love and solidarity. It's a little cheesy, but, you think about folks who are listening, the struggles of anxiety, the struggles of depression. I mean, we wouldn't be having these conversations. I wouldn't be writing books if these were light struggles, right? These are battles that people really, really struggle with. And so if somebody's out there and they are suffering through or from anxiety or depression, I just want them to know that my heart goes out to you. Much love. Wish you all the best. And I hope you know that things usually get better. They definitely can get better. And, in time, they tend to actually get better. So it just takes a little bit of time. Don't lose sight of that hope. And I'm right there with you in the fight. And my heart goes out to you.
Well, thanks so much for that, Brian. I really appreciate you being here, sharing your story, letting folks know that they're not alone. And that's a wrap, people. Huge props to Brian Sachetta for dropping some serious wisdom today. Go check out Get Out of Your Head, the book, the site, all of it, at getoutofyourhead.com. Brian, you're a legend, man. Thanks for hanging out. To all your listeners, if this hits home, subscribe, drop a review, tell your buddies about Just a Dude podcast. I'll catch you next time. Stay chill, keep your head straight, and I'll see you on the next episode.